Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to this fifth and final in the series of Ching Chong China Girl, Life, Love, Loss. Today, no knife on my Silk Road. Xian to Kashgar, a glimpse into China from the first emperor to today's Xi Jinping. We begin in Xian, the capital of Shanxi province, Shanxi with two A's, not to be mixed up with the neighboring Shanxi with one A. And we move from Shanxi to, there's Shanxi. We move from Shanxi and the first emperor to Lanzhou, which is the capital of this corridor, narrow corridor province called Gansu. And from Lanzhou, where we see Buddhist sculptures, we move to Xiahe, which is also known as Little Tibet. Then we get the fast train all the way along Gansu, and we stop at Jiayuguan, which is the western end of the Great Wall of China. We then bus to Dunhuan, where we see the Buddhist grottos, and then we enter this contentious, controversial region of Xinjiang, where at the latest reports, according to the latest reports, some 500,000 Uyghurs are under detention. When this first came to world attention, there were said to be 1 million under detention. So some improvement, perhaps. Now, Xi'an was formerly called Shangzhan, Chang'an, and Xi'an means Western peace. Xi means west, and its population is 9.5 million. The capital of 13 different dynasties, beginning with the Qin, the first emperor, who gave China its name, it said, though actually the name China didn't come into being until after the Portuguese used it in the 16th century. And another important dynasty is the Han dynasty, which did give the ethnic majority in China, the Han Chinese, their name. So most Chinese, 91%, are Han Chinese. The other 55 different ethnic groups are different minorities. And we're meeting two in particular during this trip: Muslims, the Hui Muslims, and the Uyghur Muslims. This is a close-up of the beautiful bell tower in Xi'an and the red carpet entrance to the south gate. In Xi'an's golden age, which was during the Tang dynasty, regarded as the height of Chinese civilization and culture from the 7th to 10th century, Xi'an's population of 1 million made it the world's biggest city. It began and ended the Silk Road from China to Europe, though the Silk Road can also begin, if you begin it from the far eastern coast of China, all the way through to Italy and elsewhere. Now we'll see a very brief enactment, a costumed enactment of Silk Road traders. This is a picture of the original Tang Dynasty mosque in Xi'an that was given by the Imam to my partner John Martin and me when we visited him in 1984. It's faded a little. His inscription has faded a little over the many years. And here we see the Wei Muslims, who are not causing the Chinese government any trouble. They are praying at their mosque in 84, just as they pray quite peacefully today. We were invited to sit and watch a Kung Fu tournament to mark the end of Ramadan. And John is wearing a skull cap, as is the ABC interpreter there in the middle with glasses. And with John's quirky sense of humor, he labeled this, "Carry on, Imam." Tasty Muslim markets. And the big wild goose pagoda for Buddhist scriptures brought back from India by the 7th century monk Xuanzang. And we'll meet him again later when we reach Xinjiang. China has millions of Buddhists, and the number of millions changes with every source. But Australian historian C.P. Fitzgerald, in his book from way back in my uni days, that was the first of 3 Australian Fitzgeralds closely associated with China, he says that the Emperor Han Mingdi dreamt of a divine being. He sent an envoy to the West who returned with Indian texts that were translated at Luoyang. Now, religious practice in varying forms is now prevalent throughout China. And that's because, unlike earlier years, when I lived there, when all these religions were banned because they were part of the 4 old, and everyone had to get rid of the old and only use the new, now they're back. And Chinese are reverting to part of their spiritual selves and embracing religion as something that offers more than pure materialism and what the Communist Party offers. This is a statue of the first emperor, who defeated all his rivals and united his territory into a single entity. He was the one who built the Great Wall, completed the first building of the Great Wall, burnt books and scholars alive, and had this army of terracotta warriors built for his protection in the afterlife. He was a model for the tyrant Mao Zedong, and perhaps for the autocrat come tyrant Xi Jinping. This is where I first saw the mound under these pomegranate trees where the first emperor is still buried. And to the left there is an emerging market, just beginning, a private market, where I bought this jacket with all its snakes and all sorts of creatures back in '84. By 2017, 2019, these things were not available. The place had become sophisticated, and there were queues and queues and queues and big lineups to see the warriors. When I was there at the time of this picture, there were only 4 of us looking at the warriors. There was my cameraman, my partner, and interpreter. So that made 4 of us, and the Chinese officials with whom we were arguing. No one else around, so everything has changed. Now, this is the warriors seen in Pit 1. Now, you may remember, some of you, the original exhibition that went to various states in 1982-3 to mark 10 years of Sino-Australian diplomatic relations. So this was the very first exhibition in Australia, and ever since there have been segments of the warriors on show here, up until this year, some shown in Perth. This is a warrior with a horse and a middle-ranking officer displayed behind glass. Archaeologists working in Pit 1 and the site of the discovery in 1974. Farmers were digging a well when they stumbled upon this great archaeological treasure. The surviving farmer, young Zhe Fa, signed a copy of his book for me, and this was against a backdrop of pictures with all sorts of world celebrities, including Bill Clinton. But we mustn't leave Xian without reference to the Xian incident of Christmas 1936. And I only heard about it when having lunch on the site where you now see that temple. In 1936, the communists were a guerrilla army competing with the nationalists for power. It was the Republican era, but there was a great deal of uncertainty. And Chiang Kai-shek, who'd inherited the leadership of the nationalists from Sun Yat-sen, was kidnapped in his nightclothes by two of his subordinates and held on this site. He was held there, and they wouldn't release him until and unless he agreed to a united front with the communists. Now, Japan had already invaded China and taken over Manchuria and installed the last emperor as its puppet emperor of Japanese Manchukuo. Many of you may have heard of the Geelong-born Australian in China, Peking Morrison from Geelong Grammar. But maybe not so many of you have heard of this man, Donald. I only heard of him on that trip when I was staying in Xian. He was an extremely important, a significant figure in the world today because he was, at the time, the advisor to Chiang Kai-shek. And he had been previously the advisor to Sun Yat-sen. So when he heard that Chiang Kai-shek was held under house arrest by his subordinates, he flew here to Xian and he negotiated Chiang Kai-shek's release, and he negotiated with Zhou Enlai a joint united front against the Japanese. And the question remains, if Chiang Kai-shek had refused such a united front, could the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek actually have defeated the communists, in which case the world would be quite a different place today? Now we move from Xi'an to Gansu province and the capital Lanzhou. It's most scenic, very, very beautiful. And Lanzhou has about 4 million people with 500,000 Muslims. This is a reservoir and bridge that takes us towards the Bingling Grottos with its Buddhist sculptures. And our boat across the Yellow River takes us to the Jisha Mountains, where the cafe manager demonstrates how we can drink 8 Treasures tea through a 3-story cup. Our approach to the Bingling Buddhist caves, also known as 10,000 Buddhas, it seems that wherever there are Buddhas, there are 10,000 of them. We go over a bridge with lotus pillars. Despite its muddy roots, a blooming lotus represents purity and enlightenment. Here we see two Buddhas, one seated and one in lotus position. And we move on to the giant Buddha, 27 meters. That's the height of a 3-story building. He is the Buddha of all-encompassing love of the Tang dynasty. This is giant Buddha seen from the opposite bank. And if you had the time, you could go along the two sides of this embankment, and you see all those little crevices, little bits of glass. They are all entrances to separate caves with separate marvelous works of art. And this is my favorite, the sleeping Buddha of 8.5 meters, Sukyamuni in Nirvana. From the Bingling Caves, a 2.5-hour drive to Xiahe County, also known as Little Tibet, as Tibetans here outnumber both the Hui Muslims and the Han Chinese. We check into the Civil Aviation Hotel, and next morning we, if we wish, can partake of yak yogurt, which is offered to everyone at the local monastery, the Tibetan Labrang Tibetan Monastery. This was founded in the 18th century, and it held up to 4,000 monks. Today there are 2,000 monks, but that's still more monks than anywhere else other than in Tibet. Inside the butter temple, with sculptures all made with yak butter, I meet a philosophic Lama or Tibetan teacher. This is how he enlightened me. What is being? I asked. What is I? Is there a place for visitors to meditate? What is meditation? Do you see yourself as Tibetan or Chinese? What is Tibetan? The Dalai Lama was a little more enlightening when he visited this Labrang monastery back in 1941, and on his first visit to Australia in 1982, when I was able to interview him in a private house in North Fitzroy, Melbourne, with absolutely no security. On subsequent visits, it was impossible to get near him because there were crowds of security protecting him. But on this particular visit, I asked him how he sees himself. And he said, quite simply, I'm a simple Buddhist monk. But he did admit that he liked the odd steak, adding, I'm not a very good Buddhist. This is a stupa to hold sacred relics, and the entrance to a meeting where the monks have all left their boots outside on the way to a lecture. I don't know how they find whose boot is who. Tibetans prostrating themselves around the monastery, and Tibetans turning the largest corridor of prayer wheels, 3.5 kilometers around the monastery. From Xiahe, it's back to Lanzhou for the 5-hour trip to Jiayuguan, the western end of the Great Wall of China. This western end was completed by the Ming dynasty. So this is now regarded as a Ming dynasty Great Wall. And it's a frontier post, a strategic fortification, and there are regular enactments of soldiers in drill at the frontier. east gate against heavenly mountains. And this is the entrance to Singing Sands in Gansu, where we join the camel trail, wearing camel sand boots. These are some of the beautiful images. They're the children of the dunes. Crescent Lake, in the midst of sand, right there in the desert, is considered a wonder of the Gobi Desert. A short drive from Jiayuguan, we arrive at Dunhuan. These are the unrenovated caves, as shown in the Dunhuan Museum. The caves were built for Buddhist meditation and to some extent Buddhist habitation, so they could live there too. And being here reminds me of an interview I did with Sir Sidney Nolan at the end of 1983, when he'd just come back from the Silk Road, and he told me he was about to work on a series of paintings based on the Silk Road for the centenary. And these are two of his works. One is of a Buddha, the other to the right is of a dancer. And this is the Dunhuan caves renovated, as you see them if you visit today, though all the time work is going on, opening up more caves, improving them, restoring them back to the original. The first cave, built in 366 by a wandering monk who dreamt of 1,000 rays of light. There are some 700 caves here in the Mogao Caves, in the cliff. This Taoist priest, Wang Yuanlu, who lived from the mid-19th century into the 20th century, discovered the Mogao Caves and appointed himself as its guardian. And in cave 16, he found a secret door to an adjoining cave, 17, that was filled with untouched, perfectly preserved manuscripts. The British archaeologist Aurel Stein discovered or came upon the Mogao Caves in 1907, and he is said to have removed 24 cases of manuscripts and 4 cases of paintings and relics, including the Diamond Sutra. He was knighted for his efforts. Sutra is a rule or aphorism in Sanskrit literature, and Sanskrit is an ancient Indo-European language of India for Indian epics. And it's said of the Diamond Sutra, its teachings will cut like a diamond blade through worldly illusion to illuminate what is real and everlasting. And this, according to the British Library, is the world's first, earliest, complete, and dated printed book. Paul Peyo, a French sinologist, a linguist, unlike Stein, was able to distinguish between the different manuscripts. He could recognize what was more valuable than others. And we see him here in the secret cave, number 17, examining the documents. This is the Dunhuan Guide to Cave 16 and the Hidden Cave 17 in May 2019. No photographs are allowed in some of these caves, though visitors are allowed to visit the caves that are open at any one time. However, this is a picture, as shown by SBS earlier this year, of Cave 16, and it's been renovated in color. They were all in color originally, only some have been restored to color. And this is the entrance and the picture of Cave 257, the Maitreya or future Buddha. The entrance to Cave 96, the big Buddha of 35.5 meters high. It's so big it's housed in a 9-story pagoda. And this is the picture as taken by the Dunhuan Museum of the giant Buddha. And notice that it has not been destroyed. All its features are still there. The entrance to Cave 148, another Nirvana, sleeping Buddha. I love these sleeping Buddhas. And this, as depicted by a poster of the Dunhuan Museum. And again from SBS, this picture of the same sleeping Buddha with more colored detail. And with the Buddha sleeping, it's time to leave Dunhuan and say goodbye to our guide and our driver as we leave Dunhuan and head towards Xinjiang. First of all, we must go to Liuyuan train station and the safety check. And this safety check leads to the confiscation of my 12-year-old internationally toured penknife, a Swiss Army knife just like the one pictured there. I have had this in my checked-in baggage. It has passed through numerous checks on this particular tour, but just as we enter Xinjiang, it's gone. And it reminds me of the last hotel I was in Jiayuguan, when I asked for a knife to cut some fruit. And what I received was a flimsy little plastic knife packed in cellophane, useless. And so I must continue now. We proceed with no real knife on the Silk Road. Gansu province borders the strategic and volatile Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. The areas beyond this point, the western regions, belonged to China at various times in history, including during the 2nd century under the Han and during the Mongols under the Yuan in the 13th century. The Qing or last dynasty established Xinjiang as new province, literally new territories, in the 18th century. And according to China census, Xinjiang has 26 million people with 12 million Uyghurs. That's 45% of the population. And the ruling Han are now 11 million. That's 42% of the population. And what the Uyghurs claim and statistics show is that Huns are settling there in increasing numbers, so diminishing the percentage of Uyghur settlers. In the 1950s, Uyghurs were 90% of this population. They dominated China's largest and, importantly, mineral-rich region, 1/6 of China. but the Uyghurs are being systematically reduced. And this region, Xinjiang, is vital to the old Silk Road and critical to Xi Jinping's new Belt and Road initiative that goes right around the globe. It's on the sensitive border with Russia, Mongolia, and the newly emerging independent stands. And these stands are actually putting pressure on Uyghurs to seek their own independence from Xinjiang. But I don't think that is a feasible option. Xinjiang is also subject to competition from India, because there's just a little point there that India claims. And that was where the Sino-Indian War of 1962 occurred, just there at a point in Xinjiang. So it's a very sensitive region for all sorts of reasons. The Qing emperor, who conquered and incorporated the Western regions into China, was Qianlong, seen there in a National Gallery of Victoria catalogue. And his incorporation of the Western regions into China is regarded as his most important achievement. His favorite concubine is actually buried there in Xinjiang. And Lord Macartney was George III's emissary, who in the 18th century was sent to China with a large contingent and all sorts of gifts and presents to set up diplomatic relations and trade with Britain. But Lord Macartney was not only obliged to kowtow, but he was rebuffed by Qianlong with the famous words, "We of the Middle Kingdom have no need for your country's manufactures." So setting in train the Opium Wars, when Britain would force itself upon China. After decades of tension in Xinjiang, in November 2013, Uyghurs exploded onto the world stage in this suicide car crash right in the heart of China in Tiananmen Square. Maybe some of you remember that incident back in 2013. It was blamed upon Uyghur violence and attempt at independence. 3 occupants of the SUV and 2 bystanders were killed. Uyghurs say it's not us, it's not jihadism that is causing the violence, it's cultural repression and police brutality. As a result of that car crash, the leadership in Xinjiang was changed. The man who had Sinicized Tibet and put down any thought of rebellion in Tibet, any more rebellion in Tibet, was moved to Xinjiang, so that his policies led to this BBC report in 2019 of 1 million Uyghurs in detention in Xinjiang. The latest reports, as I mentioned in the beginning, suggest that there are about 500,000 now still in detention. And The Age published a picture of such a camp after that BBC report. I think that's the picture of the internment camp of 2019. And more recently, according to Global Rights Compliance, China's forced labor in Xinjiang affects the world supply chains from electronics and kitchenware to aerospace and technology. UN experts continue to express concern over forced labor in Xinjiang. And closer to home, in Australia, Australian Uyghurs are taking action against Kmart over forced labor. Essentially, if a T-shirt can be bought for virtually nothing, it does suggest it's created by forced labor. However, against that, Australian Uyghurs taking action against Kmart and other actions worldwide, Beijing counters criticism by expanding tourist plans to have more locals and more foreigners going to Xinjiang. The aim is to have 400 million visitors a year. In 2024, Xinjiang received 300 million. Back in 2019, I was one of only 200 million going to Xinjiang. Now, local Chinese, if you speak to them, support the government policy. They say, yes, it's true that some Uyghurs are in class, up to educational classes, up to about a year. It's to educate them, to help them. And yes, it's true that cameras and surveillance are a nuisance. But we support that because it makes us safe. This is all to stop extremism. At the concourse outside Turpan train station in Uyghur Xinjiang region, here we check by passport officials and police. And the entrance to the courtyard of Silk Road lodges run by Muslims in the center of a Uyghur area. You can see the security from the inside looking out. Chinese flags denote patriotism, love of the motherland of China. And inside, Western books are on the shelf. The Taming of the Shrew. Are Uyghurs being tamed? And a Statue of Liberty, which reminds me, of course, of the goddess of liberty crushed in the Tiananmen massacre. And for breakfast, we have our patron, Xi Jinping. We had 4 police checks within the first hour of our first day in Xinjiang. This is the police checkpoint at a tourist Tuyu Uyghur village car park. And a model policeman is there on show to remind us that we're safe here at the car park, and the surveillance camera is keeping us even more safe. And a ruined mosque, a sad sight, with a passerby against the magnificent flaming mountain, viewed from the car park and the police center. The German brewery heir and archaeologist Albert Lecoq lived here in Tuyuk village while exploring Turpan. And he, like other foreign devil exploiters, shipped thousands of paintings, manuscripts, and objects to Berlin. He translated, he catalogued, and he published them. And this is Sidney Nolan's version of a foreign devil exploiter on the Silk Road. Life for the villagers here in Tuyuk village. A Muslim elder in a skull cap, a little boy with a plum, and a girl with bread. And the police station flying the flag. A statue of Xuanzang we met at the beginning, the 7th century Tang dynasty Buddhist monk who traveled from Xian to India for Buddhist scriptures. And his travel to 28 cities in 17 years led to the novel Journey to the West. This is the Gaochang Museum with a Uyghur manager. This is the gallery of foreign rogues, which documents China's view of foreigners who cause catastrophe to Chinese heritage. It ignores the fact that the preservation of many of these treasures is due to foreign intervention, because so much was destroyed during Mao's Cultural Revolution. This is the Gaochang ancient city. The ancient city built by both the Huns of the 2nd century and the Mings of the 14th century. It had 9 city gates and a rectangular inner city 3 kilometers long. That's from Beach House to where we are now. This rammed earth temple dates back to the 12th, 13th century Uyghur kingdom. And the traveling Buddhist monk, Xuanzang, taught here. And now we're going to step down to a small area to a Tang dynasty tomb. There are 2 mummies here, a male and a female of a couple. The bodies have been placed in wooden coffins with food, money, models of garments and jewelry for the afterlife. And they've been preserved for so long by the area's extremely dry climate. Flaming mountain, where temperatures can reach 50 degrees. A windy day at Bezeklik Caves in a gorge of Flaming Mountain. The Bezeklik 1,000 Buddha Caves. Bezeklik means place of painting, and the art here was created between the 5th and 14th centuries. No photographs allowed here at Bezeklik. These are images from Gaochang Museum, and the jewels were taken by foreigners. I had to go to Berlin, laments the Gaochang Museum manager. And these are from reproductions in Lecoq's catalogue of East Turkestan findings, because the originals were destroyed in World War II. But these pictures from his catalogue show enormous detail. During the Yuan, the Ming, and the Qing dynasties, we're told that Turpan remained loyal to the central government. In particular, in the 1750s, the Uyghur Emin Koja sought Qing protection from the Zhonga Mongols. He supported the Qing in their victory and conquest of Xinjiang. And his second son, Suleiman, honored his father by building the Emin minaret, or tower. And this tower is right next door to an almost deserted Turpan mosque. This is Jiao He Museum with the Turpan guide, Wendy. Zhang Chen was a Han Dynasty explorer and official, an early Han Chinese official on the Silk Road. He was dispatched by Emperor Wu Di to Central Asia in 138 BC. And he was captured for over 10 years by enemies, the Xiongnu, and returned with a Xiongnu wife and only one of his 100 original soldiers. And he believed, after his tours, that China needed a particular horse, a horse that sweated blood, that horse, that superior horse, was what the Chinese army needed. And this shows Emperor Wu Di as he farewells Zhang Chen, setting forth from Xian to Central Asia. And in the museum, we see a representation of this heavenly blood-sweating horse recommended by Zhang Chen. You'll see one hoof of the racing horses lightly touches the swallow, which, as the museum says, the swallow looks up in amazement. These Fergana horses are known for their strength and endurance and are said to be descendants of the heavenly horses. These are pictured in Jarkent, Uyghur area in Kazakhstan in 2019. Kerez is an underground water channel, and Lin Se-shu was the official who in 1839 destroyed the illegal British opium. He was so annoyed by this dumping of illegal opium in Canton, he destroyed it. And his destruction of the opium was the last straw as far as Britain was concerned, which then sent in ships and forced itself onto China and opened up all the treaty ports on the eastern coast, which constituted part of the 150 years of Chinese humiliation, which China is now saying it is overcoming, has overcome. But he was sent from Canton to Xinjiang, and he saw this Kerez, and he thought it was so marvelous, he extended this system of irrigation throughout Xinjiang. And here, by the Kerez, we see a model, probably a film model, waiting for the crew to come back. We drive from Turpan across the desert to the Xinjiang capital, Urumqi, then fly to Kashgar. Through the desert to Urumqi, we see wind farms everywhere. I'd never seen wind farms before this. And at Kashgar airport, we're in a van with revolutionary red flags. The 5-star Chinese flag for Communist Party, workers, peasants, artisans, and traders. And the hammer and sickle, the communist symbol of union between workers and peasants. And it's time for a shish kebab lunch at a restaurant with waiters, lamb at a butcher's stall, our Tajik guide, our driver, and a Paris placemat. The entrance to the Kashgar market with surveillance cameras and rugs airing. Shirts and nuts and dried fruit. This is a junction of the renovated old Kashgar. The new Kashgar, unlike the old Kashgar, has wide, straight streets that are easy to navigate and find people and places, unlike the narrow, old, winding areas where people could hide and couldn't be found. Paintings of old times adorn Kashgar's new housing blocks. And here, the remains of part of old Kashgar in the process of redevelopment. A family home turned hotel. And the faces of Kashgar, an elegant elder, a red beauty, and a smiling Buddha. Kashgar's known for its wonderful fruit, especially its melons. None of this could reach Peking back in the 80s. No infrastructure, no roads, and no fast trains. This is a 100-year-old tea house and a regular patron. Inside the tea house, surveillance cameras everywhere. They operate as the craftsmen work. Here, a coppersmith and a bamboo basket maker. Idkar is the largest mosque in China. It can hold 20,000 people. And previously, there were 10,000 regular worshippers every Friday. By 2011, the numbers had dropped to 4,000 to 5,000. And since 2016, it's reportedly been closed to worshippers, except for special holy days for propaganda purposes. Certainly, on this day, a Friday, it's deserted, inside and outside, and there is no call to prayer. And I know what a call to prayer is because I lived in Cairo in 1972-3, where there were calls to prayer constantly. Instead, this area of the mosque has been transformed into Shi Dada Square, where we're reminded that a good life is available to everyone who is loyal. And for your protection, there's a police on every corner. A centurion elm tree on the site of the former British consulate. It's now turned into a restaurant at the rear of the Chinaba Hotel. And inside the former British consulate, there's a feast going on there to the left. They're having beautiful spit lamb, and we can see this very ornately paneled hallway. And now we return to the Chinaba Royal Hotel, and my room 2218, with its view over the city and the minaret under construction, and a sickening odor emanating from the drain. New Kashgar, old technology. How to remove sickening smell from drains. After I moved to a sister hotel, I receive a compensation fruit platter. When I ask for a knife to cut the mango I bought at the market, I'm told you don't need a knife. You don't need a mango. Just eat this and enjoy. It's all cut for you. At Kashgar's gleaming airport, there are multiple security checks and pat-downs and a most welcome 10 yuan, very cheap massage, and views of snow-capped heavenly mountains as we return to the capital, Urumqi. The elite hotel in Urumqi has on its website a notice that there is 24-hour front desk and concierge service and free Wi-Fi. But it doesn't say that the free Wi-Fi only applies to phones with Chinese SIM cards. So when I query this, the manager says, well, of course. Otherwise, we don't know what you're searching for, what you're doing. But you can use my SIM card if you wish. This is the Urumqi Bazaar. It's brand new, unlike the old Kashgar Bazaar. And there's some wonderful dancing with a lot more music and dancing, and this girl on the right asked me to join in, which I do. Flags everywhere, a great deal of expression of nationalism in the capital, and the faces of the Urumqi people on a Sunday. We go into the museum to be greeted and pass through the Xi Dada foyer. Xinjiang's dry saline environment has preserved human remains for thousands of years. So it has one of the world's largest collection of mummies. As we're told, different nationalities lived and lived together, creating the splendor of different cultures. And here we see an adult female mummy, another adult female mummy, a male mummy with tattoos, and an infant. These have all come from the Tarim Basin, the site of ancient cemeteries with numerous preserved mummies. The most fascinating is this, the lowland beauty, alongside an artist's impression of this European or Caucasian. Found in 1980 with a parcel of wheat, a feathered hat, and a woven wool shawl. This mummy is said to date back to 1800 BC. The lowland beauty, when first discovered, was considered by the Uyghurs as their predecessor, their ancestor. And they claimed that this lowland beauty gave them the right, the priority over Han Chinese, who didn't arrive till 2,000 years later, according to the Uyghurs. Unfortunately for the Uyghurs, they themselves didn't arrive until much later than the Chinese, a millennium after the Chinese, because there is proof of Han Chinese in the Han era in the 2nd century BC, whereas the Uyghurs came from Mongolia in about 840. So the Uyghurs don't have a case. And this mummy remains a mystery. She is neither Sinitic-speaking Chinese nor Turkic-speaking Uyghur. Perhaps the most mysterious mummy in the world. And that's where we end our Silk Road tour, and we fly to Chengdu, capital of Sichuan province, the home of spicy food, the birthplace of Deng Xiaoping, and also known as the panda capital. And tonight, as we bed down, we feel at home because there's an Australian wine promotion going on. Furthermore, in my room, I find a fruit, knife, and fork. So things are back to normality. And this is a summary of some of the issues on the Silk Road. In particular, when we consider the Silk Road, and in particular Xinjiang, we must consider the conflicting views and the differences in history, ethnic origins, and culture. The picture is not simple. It is very complex with many views.